Welcome to the Choice, Change and Action podcast, where you get to choose, change and take action to create a different today and a different future. These are my stories of choice, change and action, along with the phenomenal guests I have on here. From a really young age, I've always desired to create a change in the world. The planet has been a constant inspiration to me, and Access Consciousness has shown me the tools to know that anything is possible. And I keep choosing. What are you going to choose?
Welcome, everyone. Our next guest is the wonderful Simone Milasas, and today we're going to be talking about her hit book, which I have many earmarks on because I have what to talk about.
That's awesome.
Getting out of debt joyfully. And I before we get started, I want to mention that this book is translated into a lot of languages. So I wanted to list it so those of you who are listening with translation know that you can get this book probably in your language because there's a lot of languages. So we have it in French, German, Hungarian, Italian, Japanese, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Slovenian, Spanish, and Turkish. So very cool stuff. Yeah.
I always forget how many languages it's in. And what we're also working on is a lot of the audio. So the book is in those languages, and now we've been releasing a lot of the audio in those languages as well. So
oh, that's great. Oh, that's wonderful. Awesome.
Yeah.
So check out those audiobooks. All right. So Simone, this book is super cool. It's really I really like it because it's a workbook, and I like doing workbooks, and I like going through things and being really methodical. So can you just tell me about like what you wanted to create for people, and for people who are new to Access Consciousness and new to you, how did you really use the tools of Access Consciousness to transform your money situation?
Okay, so I guess a quick story is when I came across Access Consciousness, it was just like, oh my goodness, it's like Gary and Dane are talking about everything that I want to create in the world, except they had this very quick way of doing it based on the processes and questions and tools. Mm-hmm. So I very quickly embraced Access and started using the tools, and my life started changing. I was waking up happier. At one stage in my life, I was waking up crying like nearly every day. I thought that was normal, Yeah. And then, so my life started changing. And here's the funny thing about the money stuff is I resisted using the tools with money. And one of the first classes that I ever organized for Gary and Dane coming out to Australia was in the Gold Coast. And it was called Money Isn't the Problem, You Are. And they have a book on that too. Money is not the problem, you are. And that was a 2-day seminar that we did in Australia. I organized the whole thing, etc. And Julia, I'm sitting in the audience, and I can, they start talking about money tools, etc. And I'm sitting there, and I can hear in my head, oh, here we go again, blah, 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 these money tools, And one of them specifically is the honor account, the 10% tool, which maybe I can talk about in a second. And hearing these tools again and sitting there, and I'm in my head, I'm like, these don't work. And I was like, hang on a second. And I knew that my financial reality was not great. I didn't know exactly how in debt I was, but I knew it wasn't great. I was doing that very typical, how do I avoid this and not look at it? I would open my mail and I'd have it all sitting there, but I just wouldn't pay the bills and I wouldn't address a lot of things. I definitely thought it would go away if I avoided it. Mm-hmm. Breaking news, it doesn't. And so I'm sitting in this seminar and I went, this is crazy. Every single Access tool I've used has worked and has contributed to me and changed my life. So what if I started using these tools? So I picked 3. I didn't even pick like all of them. I mean, talk about being, resistant. I picked 3 tools and I didn't tell anyone. And I went, I'm going to try these 3 tools out. And I went home and I set myself like on a calendar. I had a calendar on my wall, 3 months. Because like I said, I resisted that 10% tool, which the 10% tool, just quickly, is about putting away 10% of every single thing that you earn into an honor account for you. It's not for a rainy day. It's not for, you know, when you're in dire straits or to help a friend out or that unexpected bill, you are literally putting 10% away that's just for you. It's an honoring of you. And I thought that was the dumbest tool in the world. But I also knew that I had to change how I was living with money, or my financial reality was going to keep getting worse and worse and worse.
Right.
So I finally worked out, you know, sat down one day, worked out how much in debt I was by looking at everything, and realized it was 187,000 Australian dollars, picked 3 tools and started using them for 3 months. And then at the end of 3 months, I remember looking at everything and I was like, okay, I don't have a great deal of money, but I have more money than what I did. And the one thing I noticed, which kept me going, was the energy had changed. My point of view had changed around money. And so I was like, I think I'll do this, you know, for a little bit longer. And ever since then, I've got my 10% account, and I, you know, haven't spent it and haven't done that. And I friggin' love the money tools, and it changed my financial reality and got me out of debt. And I just think it's really interesting that I resisted it so much when it changed so much for me. And I see with doing classes and facilitating classes so often, that tool or that topic or that subject that you resist is usually what will change the most for you. So you do not have to be like me and resist it. Maybe get this book, Getting Out of Debt Joyfully. I'd also highly recommend Money's Not the Problem You Are. There's actually a few money books that we have in access. And like Julia said, it's like a workbook. It's like, so do the home play. But it's not just about reading it and not doing it. You've got to actually use the tools. When you use the tools, you can change anything.
Yeah. And you have like, there's so many different home plays that I just love doing. But you also have this like huge section of access consciousness clearing statements on money and getting out of debt. And those are like, that's like gold right there. Like if people took this book and did those access consciousness clearing statements, that is a game changer right there. And actually, now that I'm bringing it up, could you talk briefly about clearing statements with money?
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, so when I said I picked 3 tools, one of the tools that I picked was having a look at what my point of view was around money. Because I realized I didn't even know what it was. Like, because you so quickly will go, that's expensive, that's too much, that's cheap, that's blah, 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 that's crude, that's not possible. And I realized I didn't know what my point of view was. So I was so OCD about it. And every single time anything popped up in my world about money, like whether it was an amount for, you know, eating at a restaurant, or the price of a car, or how much rent you pay, and I would destroy and uncreate everything about that topic, like destroy and uncreate everything I've decided about how much rent is acceptable to pay, you know, on an apartment. Use the clearing statement, right and wrong, good and bad, pock and pot, all nine, shorts, boys, provids, and beyonds. It has changed since that book, but hey, it's still the same. And you can go to theclearingstatement.com and find out more about the clearing statement. But what I would do is, and even shorten it, like pock and pod. I would just pock and pod everything, because we're so quick, Julia, to reject money. Like we will go, oh, I'd like more money, I'd like more money, I'd like more money. And then you see a nice car drive past and you're like, oh, that car's too expensive, or that's not possible. So you've just uninvited money. So like I said, with everything, I was pock and potting everything, because we pick up so many different points of view from our family, our culture, religions, like where you chose to be born. It's like what it is to have money, not have money, what's acceptable. You know, like a quick story, I was in LA with a friend of mine, and she was looking for an apartment, and I was with her looking for an apartment, and we drove to this, you know, area in LA that I would have considered was a little bit more poverty mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember sort of thinking, going, you know, oh, have I locked the doors, you know? And it's like, ooh, you know, do you really want to live here? This is a bit dodgy, you know? And then we drove to this area that was more middle class, which is probably what I grew up in, right? And I noticed when we drove through there, I was relaxed, I was comfortable. I was like, oh yeah, this is nice, you know, because I knew it. That's the energy I knew. And then we went to what's it called? Not Beverly Hills. It's
Bel Air?
another Bel Air, and it's gated.
Right.
And we drove through there, and I remember I literally turned around to her and whispered, and I went, "Are we allowed to be in here?" Because I was just like, "Oh my God." And I was so intimidated by that. And I realized that's if you have the point of view that you're intimidated by wealth, you don't really want to be around like that poverty scarcity thing, and you're only happy here, that's all you'll ever create. And you won't be able to receive anything from anyone who is, has less money than you or has more money than you. So
Right.
pock and pot it, pock and pot it, pock and pot it, everything that is, so that I could receive from everything and everyone as well.
Right. That's awesome. That like for me, that has been such an interesting tool because for me too, I was very comfortable in the middle. And it's like I remember when I bought a ring from the guild about 10 years ago, and it was a big aquamarine ring, and I was just like just out of college, living with roommates, and like I had this big aquamarine ring that I had bought with my 10%. And I was like, my friends made fun of me and like called the ring ugly and said it looked like costume jewelry. And like, oh, Julia, you're so weird and eccentric. And I was like, I'm not giving up on having a greater life. And I was like, I would wear that ring. And as uncomfortable as it made me, and as much as people judged me, I was like, what would it take for my life to fit this ring rather
Mm.
than me take off the ring and have a normal life? And that ring actually like contributed to me so much, changing my life and my future. And a lot of what you're saying, like what we're talking about, pocking and potting, using the access consciousness clearing statement along the way, like I have to have something greater. Now, what tools can I use to actually change the way that I'm living to something that I really like?
Yeah, and not listening to, your friends and family and the people around you. It's like, that's, I mean, it's a great story, Julia. And I'm always like, wow, what would it take for us to live and be surrounded by people who were supportive?
Yeah.
Who were like, wow, Julia, that's amazing that you got to buy that ring. It's absolutely beautiful and you deserve that and even more. That's the world I want to live in. I know I'm maybe
Oh my gosh,
crazy,
nobody was
listening,
ever
but
that energy. So kind.
I know, but it's like, well, I mean, we're surrounded more by that now. It's
Yeah, we
like,
are.
yeah, it's like that kindness and that generosity of spirit. So, I mean, I wrote the book Getting Out of Debt Joyfully because I wanted people to have these tools that they could use, that knowing that they could change their financial reality as well. Because, sometimes I think I created myself to be a financial mess so I could write the book and actually contribute to so many people around the world. Because I did create myself to be a financial mess. And and I say a mess because I really wasn't willing to look at it, and it was messy. If you walk into a room and it's so messy and you can't find
Mm.
anything, I was
Yep.
really good at creating that. It's like, just make it so messy so I don't have to look and see what's actually going on. And one of the things I realized with using all of the tools is, it's these insane points of view that we have that lock us up. If we could figure everything out with our logical mind, we'd have everything we ever desired. But so often we have such an insane point of view around something that's usually not ours, and we pick that up and create that as our reality. But if we, pock and pod that and get rid of it and change it, there's a whole brand new, day ahead of you. There's a whole brand new life ahead of you that you can choose to live. So
Totally. Totally. That's amazing. And then at the back of the book, you have some really cool interviews with people from different podcasts and radio shows, and those are really inspirational. The one with Chris Hughes
yeah.
is super, super cool. How he changed his financial reality and just got free and was willing to have something different. Um, so it's like with all of this and with getting out of debt, like you've talked about the 10% account and pocking and potting, and like for you, when did you really start to notice like, wow, I am not in debt or a poor person anymore? Like I've actually like I'm creating something that's like alive and not a mess and clean and working and actually something that works for me. Like I love when Gary Douglas says like he did a telecall like 10 or 12 years ago called having a business that works, 12 steps to creating a business that
Mm,
works. And like the words that works, like
mm,
I didn't even know what that meant. I'd never seen anybody had a life that totally worked until him and you and Dane and like people who were thriving.
mhm.
So like when did you go from a life that was like a financial reality that was messy to something that totally like actually worked?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to say it was a little gradual and it was also extreme. Like
Mm.
when I started using those tools, right? Stuff in my financial reality changed really quickly for 187,000 Australian dollars. And I mean, there was a couple of things that showed up. One is I ended up going, because I used to work, I had a business prior to Access called Good Vibes for You. And I worked a lot in the music industry and different,
Really? You worked
um,
in the music industry?
yeah, that's how I started in the music industry when I was like 18. So,
Cool.
um,
What'd you do? Sorry, I have to know.
oh, well, I did many things, but the first thing we did was I worked for a company that used to organize lighting and audio for nightclubs and for tours. So, say if there was a band that came out from America, came out from America, they would have the band and they'd have their core crew. But because it's so expensive to go on tour and bring out everyone, they would hire equipment and they would hire people like roadies, etc., from places within Australia. So we would organize that. So we'd have to organize the tour manager and the roadies and the equipment and everything. So you got to go on a lot of um, you got to go to a lot of different musical events. And then years later, I've always really liked music, but years later, with Good Vibes for You, I started to do merchandise for bands. And
Oh,
I
for
was
the
actually,
bands.
sorry?
You did merchandise for the bands, not
Yes.
like not just good vibes for you merchandise, but
No, merchandise for bands as well. And one
cool.
of the bands I did it for at this stage, it was one of the biggest, artist in Australia at the time. He was number one, and I did his merchandise. And we went on tour for 2 weeks, and I made a bunch of money, like really quickly. And I had put my mindset to, okay, I'm gonna get out of debt here. So we went on tour, did all of that. Actually, it was a really interesting gig because we were on tour, and there was another friend of mine who's a musician, and he was like, "Hey, how do you like being on tour?" And I went, "You know what?" I was like, this is everything I thought that I wanted. Like, you've got AAA passes, you can get into any nightclub, backstage, everything, all that sort of stuff. And I just found Access, like I was new to Access. And I said to him, I like going on tour, but I don't think I want to go on tour with music. I think I want to go on tour with, this other thing. And it was funny because the drummer heard they were playing hacky sack backstage in Sydney at the Hordern Pavilion, and hurt his ankle. And so I was like, hey, I can do this stuff. And I like started doing MTVSS, and he's looking at me and I was like, this is what I really do, not just the merchandise, and started doing that. So it woke me up because I'd created everything I thought I wanted to be happy. And I was enjoying it, but it wasn't everything that I truly desired. So I actually started letting go of that merchandise. And I mean, in hindsight, I could have sold that business and like with doing that, because it was getting pretty popular based on I was doing the top artists in Australia. So everyone was like, what's this business like, and started asking, who I was.
Right.
But I didn't, rookie mistake. I was like Access, and headed over there
Yeah.
and started doing that. So, but I do remember, Julia, the day that I was like kept looking at my accounts and everything, and I realized I had money, and I was like, I have money, and I was so bored. I was like, this is it. Like, I really was like, it was a bit of a letdown that I wasn't no longer in debt. But I was smart enough to look at that and go, okay, what am I creating with that? And what do I love about being in debt? Which is one of the tools in the book. What do you love about being in debt? And I realized I liked the energy of like, oh, rent's due. I've got to create. I've got to create. I've got to create. And I was using no money as the source of creation, which I see a lot of people do, rather than what if you could just make it easier? And what if you could just create because you could create, not because you're desperately got to pay a bill? So within 2 weeks, I found myself back in debt, and I was like, okay, what is this? And I realized I knew the energy of being in debt. It was comfortable for me. I knew how to deal with it, and I didn't quite know how to deal with having money. So, but I made the demand then, okay, I'm going to find out what it's like to actually have money. So I still didn't have an ease. Like there wasn't like a, as you referred to, living this life of like where something that works. I was still like this up and down yo-yo of how I felt about money and what my point of view was. And I'm going to say it was quite a bit later when I probably had about $30,000 in my honor account. And I remember the relaxation in my world and in my body was like, oh, okay. And then I was like, okay, now what can I create? What can I choose? Not from this desperate need of needing money. It was more from a relaxation. And ever since then, I mean, I don't think you ever become really complacent with it, with money. Like I have a lot of investments now. I have stock portfolio. I have money, I'm not worried about paying a bill. And yet there's always still more, and not necessarily like going, oh, more money, like this thing. But yeah, I'd like to create a hell of a lot in the world. Like one of the things we have going at the moment is a property in Costa Rica called El Lugar. It's like, man, I wish I had a spare 5 million that I could just throw it, over there so that we could just, finish it straight away rather than taking longer. So for me, there's always something else that I would like to choose and like to create, and not based on greed, just based on what do I want it to be like in the planet, like what do we want to be here on planet Earth? It's like money contributes, money helps. So I'm going to say, if you're listening to this, stop resisting it and start choosing it. You are the source of creation, not money, but by your choices, you get to choose something different and receive something different.
Wow, that's so amazing. And it, like, for me, and I will always make this shout out, when I took Business Done Different with you, that's when things really shifted for me, and I just stopped thinking about money. Like all of a sudden, I just didn't care anymore. It just was like whereas before it was like adrenaline, doggy paddle, adrenaline, and all of a sudden it was like gone. And I was like, and then I just sort of like watched Will and Grace for about a month. Just sat. And I watched Will and Grace from season 1 to season 8. It's 8 seasons.
Right. Yeah.
And I watched every episode of Will and Grace. And it took me about a month. And I was just like, okay, I'm just going to watch Will and Grace. I had enough extra to kind of just keep things moving. And my husband, Anthony, supplemented whatever else. And I was like, I can chill. So I chilled. And then after that, I started to get bored. And I went, okay, like now what do I want to create?
Yeah.
Not for money or from money.
Yeah.
Like what is valuable to me. And my whole life changed. And now it's like I'm doing all kinds of different things. I'm realizing what's valuable to me. And I am like doing different things that I love, like floral arrangements and cooking and estate sailing and redecorating my house, like things that I love, along with doing my business in a really easy way. So it is this thing of like the relaxation, and like if you don't have to doggy paddle. And I thought that could never show up. Like I was just like, it's not possible. I don't believe it. I've heard about it. I don't believe it, and then it actually did change to relaxation.
And, Gary Douglas once said that if the staff of Access would relax, we would increase 75%. And I think we all just went, yeah, whatever, don't be ridiculous. And it's taken years, like he said that years ago. And I've noticed how many of us have started to relax, and we won't, and then we do, and then we won't, and then we do. But from that relaxation, I mean, even if you just look at the energy of it, you become aware of so much more. And it's not like from the doggy paddle, desperate, how to get to ABC. It's like, no, it's from relaxation. I mean, I always look at nature. I went for this long walk today up here in Italy near the castle. It's just so beautiful, like the flowers, and it's so green, and the smells, and and the sun it wasn't too hot, but it was so beautiful. And from that relaxation, nature creates itself. And yeah, there might be this big thunderstorm, or super hot, or lots of rain or wind or anything like that, but it's not done from a desperateness. It's done from, that's what shows up. And what if we started to live our life, our business like that, and with our money flows?
Yeah.
But the one thing I would say is, if you are listening to this, and because you are the one that knows if you are resisting looking at your money stuff, if you're resisting using some tools to change your financial reality, if you are putting it away for, I'll deal with that next week or next month, etc. You are the only one that knows, and you are the only one that can choose to change that. And I desperately thought that my life would be better if I ignored money and even judged money, and did all that. I can prove to you I don't need it, I can survive without it. I've been there, done it, and all of that. I've got some amazing stories as well in getting out of debt joyfully. And I can tell you, you don't need to make it hard. It can be way easier than what you think it is. And you start using access consciousness tools, you can change your financial reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in closing, like what you said about how like money doesn't end and you're still creating and there's always more. But just it's in a way that works for you and is like an addition, not like trying to like dig out of a hole. And I just didn't I'm just so grateful that actually can exist on the planet. And that's really what this book is all about.
Yeah, me too, Julia, so much.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on here and just having this conversation. And I hope for those of you out there listening, this has inspired you to just have more of you in your financial world and have more ease in your financial world. And we have the book in many languages, and we invite you guys to read, to listen. And even if you aren't in debt, that you don't need to be in debt to read this book. This book
True story
is about, and so many of us are, even when you don't have debt, so many people are self-debtors. And this book will also heal where you're a self-debtor and don't put yourself first. So there's so many applications of this book, and I'm just so glad that you wrote it.
Thank you, Miss Julia.
Awesome. Thanks, Simone. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to hit the follow or subscribe button on your favorite listening platform to get notified of new episodes. We read all the reviews, so if there's any topic you would like to hear about, let us know. If you'd like to know more about the tools, information, and classes mentioned in the podcast, head on over to SimoneMilasas.com and follow me on Instagram at SimoneMilasas, or the podcast has its very own link on Instagram at Choice, Change and Action. Don't forget, you can download the show notes, and lastly, have way too much fun today.